So we are going to get started. This is another incredible outlier project, Conversations with Legends series, which are always a ton of fun. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, if you're not on Mighty Networks, get on Mighty Networks. If you know people in the community that are not on Mighty Networks, tell them to get their ass on Mighty Networks, because it makes things a lot easier. We are also going to be promoting Project 1000, which is our desire to get to 1,000 members by the end of the year. The easiest way to do that, hello, Sonny, is right in Mighty Networks. You can invite people to join. So through January 1st, the price is $240. It goes to $480 after that. But everyone that, when you're locked into that price, you're locked in for life. So anyone that doesn't join at $240 is crazy. And so anyway, we need everybody's help to get to 1,000. I want to give a quick shout out. Ken Landon is here. Ken brewed an unbelievable beer that he dropped off. I don't know if you guys can see it with the glare, but this is our People Over Everything beer. It says gratitude on the bottom. It is delicious. And we're selling it all for charity. So we've already raised a ton of money for the Joe Andruzzi Foundation. Joe won 3 Super Bowls with the Patriots, but he's a cancer survivor. And the artist, Kyle Wallach, who came up with the label for our beer, is a cancer survivor. So we chose Joe to give all the money to. So we've already raised like $1,000, which is fantastic. So if you want a People Over Everything beer, because there's 360 of them out in the wild, all you have to do is make a $50 donation to the Joe Andruzzi Foundation. You'll get a beer, you'll get a People Over Everything koozie, a People Over Everything coaster. So yes, it will be the most expensive beer you ever bought, but this at $100 is the most expensive t-shirt I've ever bought. So, but I did it for my boy Andy. So that's book club coming up. This is kind of cool, especially because we've got Andy here. This month, we're reading Jason Van Camp and Andy's book, Deliberate Discomfort. So make sure you pick that up. Jason's going to be joining us on September 6th. Then we have next book up for next month is Christine Lilly's book, Powerhouse. If you want an autographed copy, Kathy, what do they need to do to get an autographed copy from Christine? So Christine, Hall of Fame soccer player, 2 World Cups, 2 Olympic gold medals. She's a legend.
You can just send me a message. I'll get you the Venmo to Christine and you can have it personalized and shipped to you. $25.
Awesome. So you're going to want to read the book anyway. You might as well get it autographed by a legend. And then Iman Obu wrote the book, The Glass Ledge. She's amazing, a scientist, Miss New York, the CEO of Sway Media, and she's going to be joining us November 1st. Conversations with Legends series, real quickly, we have a power panel, which we have never done before, and that is coming up on August 23rd, so coming up very quickly. Rachel Druckenmiller, who's a member of the community, is going to be moderating. And we've got Claude Silver, Jason Van Camp, and Laura Gassner-Otting. So 3 of our 4 board members joining us to talk about leadership through tough times. August 30th, we have Janelle McCauley, Air Force veteran, pilot, overall badass. She's doing incredible things now. And then September 12th, which is a Monday, we have Colin O'Brady. Colin has 10 world records, including the only man to ever walk across Antarctica solo unaided. He wrote a New York Times bestseller called The Impossible First, and he just wrote a book that's already a bestseller called The 12-Hour Walk. So join us. I know RHO, you're a big fan of Colin O'Brady. Join us September 12th for Colin. He's been on Jimmy Fallon. He's been on, you name the show, he's been on it, Joe Rogan, etc. So real quickly, for those of you who have never been on before, Andy and I are going to do about 30 minutes or so together. And then if you have a question for Andy, you don't have to ask your question in the chat. Just put in the chat, hey, I've got a question, and I'll tee you up and you can ask it directly to Andy. So without any further ado, I wanted to introduce Andy Riise. So let me give you a little bit of background about who Andy is. Andy is a graduate of West Point. He played football at Army. At one point, he was the offensive MVP, which is not easy for, I think you were a fullback, which is pretty cool. U.S. Special Forces. He's a 2 times Bronze Star recipient. He's a Presidential Leadership Scholar. He was an Eagle Scout back in the day. He's the founder of Design to Perform, and he's been a mental skills performance coach for the Mariners, the Rockies, and the Reds. He's an expert on mental toughness, which we're going to talk a lot about today. And he has an epic challenge with one of our members in our community, John McCaskill, who's a Navy SEAL. They are doing a half triathlon to raise money for Warrior Rising, which is Jason Van Camp's nonprofit, and they're trying to raise $133,000. I did my part. I bought my t-shirt for Team Andy. I will say I played Switzerland. I have my Team John shirt, so I'm straddling the fence here, but it's a great Army, Navy, West Point, Annapolis grudge match, which I'm sure Andy will talk a little bit about. But before we get into it with Andy, Kathy, get us started.
Inside me, son of a god, I'm like a titan that's rising on just you watch. I'm stepping into fate, there is no time to waste. I've got that lightning inside me, this is how legends are made. This is how legends are made.
Thank you, Kathy. Welcome, Andy. I'm glad we didn't use the picture. It's funny. I posted something, I think it was Sunday, and Andy sends me a text right away. He's like, just so you know, that's not me. So we had some pictures, I don't know, some random guy. I don't know who it was.
Russians hacked your account. The Russians hacked your account, Scott. I give you credit.
Could have been. So, Andy, welcome. We're excited to chat today. Good to see you.
Great to see you, Scott. Thank you. I'm a huge fan. Long-time listener, first-time caller. top nation. You guys are awesome. I'm just so proud to be a member, and considering the panel of awesome guests you've had, I'm really humbled by this. So thank you.
Well, I'm excited, and I think this topic to me is so relevant, especially today. I love talking about mental toughness. So I'm curious, we're just going to dive right in here. From the ball field to the battlefield to the boardroom, mental toughness is important, very important. But do you train for mental toughness the same way in sports, in the military, and in your battles in corporate America?
100%, absolutely, yes. And I think the thing to really define here is about what a performance is, right? And so we all these different arenas and hats that we wear in life that, arenas where we're performing in, performance is doing your job or executing tasks. And we always want to execute our tasks well, particularly up the upper range of our potential. And so when you're, if you're doing a mundane task, like, trying to click on a Zoom call and, and lead a facilitated room like this for the first time, or you're doing a really difficult task, like, hey, I'm leading a patrol in Afghanistan, or I'm leading a corporate board meeting, during a merger type conversation, like, stress is relative, but performances are performances, I say too. So the great news is that you can train your brain the same way you train your body, your team, and your craft.
And so how do you do that? What are some of the things that you do? I think deliberate discomfort is a piece of it. What do you do to train for mental toughness?
Sure. I think the first thing is, understanding, developing self-awareness. You think of like the emotional intelligence competencies, I think that are universal to leaders and high performers, right? And I call it first being a thermostat. One, you got to be able to read your own temperature, and then you got to have the ability to understand the controls on your thermostat to actually control your own internal temperature. And those controls are how you think and how you respond or how you behave. The T and the B are the controls that you have always, right? And then if you're able to do that and be the thermostat, you're in a much better position to be aware of your environment, of your surroundings, and the social situation. And then you can better influence other people towards common goals. So those competencies are super important. But with that being said, it's all about, it starts with how you think and how you respond to specific situations in deliberate and intentional ways that allow you to be able to get to optimal outcomes, one step at a time in the present moment. And I think that, there's a whole bunch of different mental skills, and we could get into it. But what I really like about the mental toughness framework is it provides an art and a science and a how to develop that regardless of your performance arena.
One of the things that I hear all the time, especially because of the COVID situation, is that stress is at an all-time high. But I wonder, from your perspective, is stress at an all-time high, or resiliency at an all-time low? Because so much of the adversity that normal people face has been stripped away from us. Especially as parents, sometimes I think we think we're doing our kids a favor by inoculating them from adversity, but I think adversity can be a gift. So I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
The short answer is I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's important to first kind of understand what stress is. I mean, stress is your natural response to stimuli, right? That's external or internal. It's not good or bad. We tend to think of stress, when misconception that it's bad, but stress can actually be good for you. Common one is like, hey, a great stress is like, is the birth of a child, for example, and depending on where you sit on the perspective as a man or a woman, that stress is definitely relative, right? But that's such an incredibly stressful moment for everyone. But what a joyful experience is. When you think about going to the gym, you were putting stress and breaking down your muscles, and then you were building them back up when they repair and recover. So, but we tend to think about it in negative terms. And so I think that, but what's important to understand is each individual has a natural response that you can train yourself to determine what your threshold of stress is to be at your best. And the way to think about it too, and we'll include this in the show notes, but if you look up the inverted U theory, is basically, hey, is that as we perceive stress over time, we go from kind of this boredom, mundane type thing too. So think about like I'm pitching, I'm a salesperson, and I'm pitching to a new client that I really want to land this big contract. Well, early, I may be really nervous early on up to a certain point to where, then I start to get the relative stress that I'm receiving from the internal, external stimulus, both physiologically and mentally, is going to get me to this really sweet spot, this Goldilocks zone where I can function optimally. And that's at the upper range of that is when we've experienced like flow or zone like moments when we've been at our best, time has slowed down, we've balled out, like we've absolutely, we're not really thinking that much. But then when the stress continues to increase, we find the curve starts to diminish and it goes down. And the challenge with stress is that when you have chronic stress that's consistently high and you don't have the coping skills, which you're talking about, to be able to then get down into the recovery zone, before your next performance event, you kind of get into these things. That's where you start to see traumatic stress, you start to see anxiety, depression, all these symptoms, on psychologically that are illness and injury, makes you more susceptible to that. But the same thing physiologically. So that Yerkes-Dodson inverted U theory, it holds true. So stress is relative for all of us. The good news is that we have the ability to, over time, by exposing ourselves to more stress, by giving it out of our comfort zone and doing hard things, as we say. And again, hard things are relative too. I'll put this as well too. When my good friend James the Iron Cowboy Lawrence, he did 50 Ironman triathlons in 50 states in 50 days. Okay, so it's like, well, he just didn't show up one day off the couch and say, I'm going to go do this. He already had a couple world records, in terms of doing 30 Ironman triathlons, which, oh, by the way, that's 140 total miles times 50, that's 7,000 miles. That's like flying from New York to London and back, right? And he did that in 7 days. I mean, so he had to come up with a plan on how to take on that challenge. He was relatively prepared, but to take that to the next level, which he wanted to do, he had to slowly extend that threshold of stress mentally, physically, and even socially, because he brought his family along. He had to have his team, all the sponsors, and be able to do that. A beautiful part that to exemplify what we're talking about here is that, he would, after every single day, he was raising money for charity to raise awareness for childhood obesity, kind of like we're doing with our triathlon, but on a much larger scale. And at the end of each race, he would have the people in the community come out and finish his last 5K of his race. And towards the end, at basically mile 40, as race 45, his mom, who had struggled with obesity her entire life, had made it her goal to do the 5K with him for the last 5. And he had this beautiful moment in the documentary. If you want to watch or read his book, he talks about, hey, my heart is not the same as your heart, right? Like, you don't have to go be a special operations person and, or go do 50 Ironman triathlons, or go do like Colin O'Brady and do these amazing feats. I mean, they're inspirational, they're crazy, but sometimes like you're in a position to where just waking up and getting to work and showing up is a hard thing, depending on what your mental state is. And so I do agree with you about the comment. I think we as parents, we look at our generations, it kind of is the immigrant mindset. It's manifest destiny. We have each generation who is immigrated here to our country has tried to make life easier for the next generation. And I think we've unintentionally did ourselves a disservice by doing that, right? By making things easier for the next generation, we are actually setting them up for failure, because what I see all the time with young people, whether they're Major League Baseball players who've got all the talent in the world, and talent's overrated, which is why I love that name change, by the way, is that when you get punched in the mouth and you hit adversity for the first time, what are you going to do? And I've seen a lot of young people, both in the military, baseball, and even, on the corporate side, or even healthcare is a huge problem right now. One of my verticals is that, they tend to want to quit, and hang it up, go do something else. And I think that's that's where the resilience piece in, because they've not received the mental and emotional training and skills along with their education that allows them to be able to extend that threshold to understand what their even perceived limits are. And so I think it's a combination of nature and nurture a little bit that's leading to this continued stress cycle that we have. We got, we sort of got a COVID, and we got Omicron, and we got monkeypox. It's like, when's this going to end? Right? You got people who are waiting for things to come back to the way they were because they're used to the in-person culture. Now they're in a hybrid environment with a new group of people who don't know the difference. I mean, that's some major challenges that we're facing. Oh, by the way, we're coming into recession. The challenge, change, and adversity is never going to stop, right? So how we can't control that. So how we respond to that individually, and both as a leader and as a team, is really separates, average performers to great performers who win consistently more than they lose.
Is part of it acceptance that things are always going to change? And I think, there's so many people that are, catastrophizing. This doesn't happen as much now, but earlier, during COVID, every podcast I would go on, they would ask me, like, what's the last 2 years been like? And, I wanted to answer the question, but it was like, I don't really catastrophize those last 2 years. Yes, it was different, but you know, there was 9/11, there was anthrax, there was Y2K, there was 2008. You know, there's a whole host of things, and there will be a whole host of things to come.
That's right.
And as part of developing that mental toughness, just acceptance that that's the way it's always going to be.
Yeah, 100%. And just to give a definition of mental toughness is the ability and willingness to execute tasks at the upper range of your potential, regardless of circumstances. In other words, it means, being at your best, getting the most out of what you have to be at your best when it matters more often. That's what it is.
Yep.
So to answer your question, right, so I think that acceptance is a huge part of this too, especially on the resilience aspect, which you look at the 4 C's of mental toughness. There's control, there's commitment, there's challenge, and there's confidence. And so when we think about resilience, we think about the ability to bounce back, like the tennis ball effect, right? So if something bad happens, let's say I have a grandparent that dies, right? Okay, well, they lived a good life, they're not suffering anymore. I mourn and I bounce back, right? That's resilience, has to do with the control and the confidence aspect of mental toughness, which is why I like it, because it includes things like resilience and grit and some of the other things like hardiness you may be familiar with as well. Hardiness is probably more on this obscure side. But yeah, acceptance is a big part of that. And you look at Dr. Stephen Hayes, he developed what's called acceptance and commitment therapy. You should check him out. It's called the third wave of cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy, like you think, like even like going back to the early period of psychology when we were dealing with injury and illness and trying to figure out what made people mentally sick, so on and so forth, right? We just didn't know. We just put people away in asylums, right? We're trying to figure that out. The whole idea, the cognitive behavioral therapy, the skill-based aspect of psychology, when mental skills kind of came on the scene before even sports psychology was a thing, the whole idea was like, okay, well, I'm going to challenge my thoughts, right? And so based on the situation that happens to me, my perception, the lens by which I see myself in the world, and my perspective, my understanding is all determined by how I think. And that's within my control. So if I see a bad situation, right, am I going to fight with it and wrestle with it, or am I just going to accept it for what it is? And I think that's the first element of ACT, and I call that the ADC method. I mean, first of all, you have to be able to accept what is happening, and what is happening to you is real, and what you perceive may be the reality, or it may not be. And then I think that helps you to shift into what's called neutral thinking, which is, I think, a lot of times, and this comes from Trevor Moawad. I'm part of a group called Limitless Minds, started by Russell Wilson, quarterback for the Denver Broncos, is ran by his brother and a team. Trevor Moawad's no longer with us, was a very famous sport performance psychologist. And his book, Getting to Neutral, is a fantastic read. And he talks about this idea about positive thinking being just really overrated because it's not realistic in the moment. If you're familiar with Admiral James Stockdale, who survived 8 years in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War, was tortured, psychologically, messed with every single day. The reason why he got through that is because he accepted the current reality of what he was in, but he never lost faith in himself. And what his purpose was is to be able to survive the next day, the next moment, to get through that experience. And then he was awarded the Medal of Honor. So I think when you look at that Stockdale paradox, is a way of accepting things, allowing you to name what my thinking and my emotions are. You have to name them to tame them. Once you start to do that, then you can then detach yourself. That's the D in ADC. You can detach yourself, saying because we are our thoughts, right? We often get caught up in our own thoughts through our self-talk or whatever it is, especially when we're our own worst critic. I call it the inner dictator. And that's really just kind of beating us down on a single day, especially when things are not going our way. We get caught up in that cycle. It's like this riptide you can't get out of, right? But when you can when you can accept things and detach them, you can then understand, okay, now I'm going to turn down the inner dictator. I'm going to turn up the inner liberator in terms of my effective self-talk. The dictator's not all bad, right? It's kind of like Sacha Baron Cohen in that parody, right? He's kind of funny jackass, right? And so he serves a purpose, even though we have this negativity bias. It's from our evolution, is that it's designed to keep us safe. But what's designed to keep us safe, thousands of years ago, isn't necessarily what keeps us moving forward now. So if I can understand what are the facts, look at things objectively, now I can commit to more effective thinking that's going to get me to my next best step and my next small victory.
I think as leaders, whether you're leading a sports team or whether you're a leader in the military, or whether you're a leader in corporate America, trying to figure out whether somebody has mental toughness can be challenging. And I see so many companies, they really look at hiring people with experience rather than looking at, work ethic, discipline, resiliency, those things that really translate to success. How do you measure those things? What are good ways for us as leaders in business to figure out whether somebody has a great work ethic, whether they are disciplined, whether they have resiliency?
Yeah. Well, I think the good news is we can measure it, right? And I think that we should. And I would like to see that happen more often. I benefit from, through living in elite military populations and then going right into elite professional sports organizations. And, they're more similar than they're different. And one of the things they have in common is that the way they look at, human capital, right? And so how they assess, select, and then develop, specific attributes and traits that otherwise people think are intangible. I'll take, for example, like the NFL. So the NFL, you think about the combine, right? To where you're measuring how much you can bench press, 225, your 40-yard dash, how high you can jump, so on and so forth, right? And for the longest time, they measured the Wonderlic, which was not even a valid or reliable intelligence test. Well, what the NFL borrowed from what we were doing in our most elite military populations, for example, in Delta Force for a long time, Dr. Mike Sanders, a good example, shout out to Mike, for the longest time as an organizational psychologist, spent 20 years developing the assessment tool to select our most elite commandos in the world, and so the makeup of that, and then he's able to do predictive analysis in terms of who was able to come back and be the next leaders. So it was not only selecting the best qualified candidate, but then what is the development plan to then bring them back and groom them as the leaders of the unit at echelon at the different levels. And so the NFL borrowed from that, and then they developed another assessment tool. So in addition to the physical combine, which you see on TV now, what you don't see behind the curtain is that there is a psychological combine that's going on. And we're able to, to where draft picks are determined not just by their physical, tangible attributes, but also by their intangible attributes. And so I think, does that translate to the business world? It gets tricky, right? Because, how do we do discriminatory stuff, and how do we determine someone gets hired because they were selected as mentally tough versus not? A couple measurement tools that are out there. The one that I employ is through my partnership through AQR International. We have a whole suite of mental toughness questionnaires, and that assesses you based on the four C's, but also the 8 factors. And it's a very valid and reliable tool. It's great for both individuals and for leaders. So I'd recommend that. But there are others, but I think the key thing for you to look at, if you're an HR professional or you're a leader who's looking to do assessment, I mean, obviously I would recommend going to some great corporate search firms. I'm affiliated with Into Growth. They're a fantastic corporate search firm. And I know that they use valid and reliable tools to help assess the intangibles that are going to determine the right fit. And then they're in a position to help you then groom and develop not only the individual that you've selected, but the team to be able to integrate and then grow to be able to grow together. And I just think that entire process I just described is lost on a lot of organizations, right? And then and I think a lot of our HR systems are broken. That's been my impression coming in. And I'm not saying that my career experience in the military was great, but I think the way that at least the way we develop leaders in the Army is very good. I don't think it's great; can always get better, But I have not been impressed with HRs. I just got to know you. We've had this conversation from onboarding to continue to pour into your people. I mean, there's a lot of things that are needed, and I think this is one of them. So if you can't select them, I can still think you could use these tools to then be able to get a baseline understanding and then develop your people and pour into them. And that's one of the causes of the Great Resignation, is that people have a choice, and they feel that if the company is not as invested in them as they are and they're not a part of something bigger than themselves, then they're going to walk. And so I think that mental toughness and providing this type of service, whether it's through coaching, it's through apps or these other things, are a way to be able to continue to pour into your people to make them better, and hopefully you see that ROI as a result.
Agreed. So I've got a ton of questions, but I'm going to wrap up with this one, which is a little bit off the mental toughness topic, but I love things that, you can quickly understand and they make a big impact on you.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking of the very famous commencement speech, Make Your Bed by Admiral McCraven.
Yeah.
If you haven't ever seen that, you got to check it out. It's like 15 minutes long, but it's Admiral McCraven, who was a Navy SEAL, who gave a commencement speech at the University of Texas. And he talked about the concept of starting your day with a win by making your bed. You've got a similar story. I'm going to call it the Toyota story.
Yeah.
But it's so impactful. When I heard it, I'm like, I totally get it. And it makes sense. And I can implement that tomorrow. Tell us the Toyota story.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. Like I got a chance to meet Admiral Craven recently, so the fact that you even included me in the same breath as him is I'm humbled by that. But yeah, this is my introduction to servant leadership, which is a form of leadership that I've adhered with my entire life. In the time that I was a Boy Scout and an altar boy at church, but I didn't really understand the art and science of this until I was a brand new lieutenant. I graduated in June of 2001. 9/11 happened. And everything obviously changed. And so my unit, I was a platoon leader, wet behind the ears, 22 years old. And so wasn't married. And so I was really, and I didn't really have a great senior non-commissioned officer who was supposed to be my right-hand person. So I was really kind of running with scissors in the dark a lot. And so I relied heavily at that time on my peers who had more experience than I did. And there's a guy named Brian Davis. He was what we call a Mustang, which means that he was enlisted. He came into the Army right out of high school, spent a couple of years in the Army. Then he went to the Officer Candidate School, which is a 19-week program. It's one of 3 commissioning sources to become an officer. And then he was there, and he was the platoon leader before I was there. So he was a couple of years ahead of me, but we were still peers because we're both lieutenants, right? And so we shared an office, and then we'd work really hard during the day. And obviously, hey, our nation's at war, and we're waiting for our number to get called to go overseas. And so the level of intensity was high, and we were working long hours, and we would go back to our office, and usually officers were the only one who had computers at this time. This was the early 2000s. And so we're doing all of our paperwork for the day after we down in the motor pool, or we were out in the field training. So it's late, and then up in the headquarters in their headquarters building, which you think is kind of more white collar, they had what's called a training room. And that's where you had like an orderly, usually it was a soldier who was injured or like rehabilitating somehow, or maybe got into trouble, and then they were up there working and basically answering phones and helping make sure everything was going in terms of processing paperwork administratively, whatnot. And one of those soldiers, big guy from Paducah, Kentucky, I'll call him Private Joe Snuffy, and so he would come in every night, around 5:30 at night, and we're still pounding away behind our computer screen, and he would take out the trash and so forth. And then I noticed a pattern forming. Brian Davis would not, he would tell him, hey, no, I got it. And so that happened for about a month, about the first month I was in the unit. And at one point in time, I noticed it, and I said, hey, Brian, why don't you let Snuffy take out your trash? And he turned and he looked at me, and he was a giant smart aleck. He's like, yeah. And so I thought he was joking, but he was very serious. He said, Andy, when I was a soldier like Snuffy once, and I said that when I had the opportunity to be able to be a leader and be in this position, that I was never going to be too good to take out my own trash. And so I swore that I would always take out my own trash. I'm like, wow. And so the next day Snuffy came in, and I kind of blocked the trash can. He was a big guy, right? And I kind of was joking around, and he said, he was trying to get around me. And he said, sir, I got to get the trash. I said, no, Snuffy, I got the trash. Don't worry about it. He's like, sir, he went to the position of attention. He's like, sir, this is my job. This is my duty. I'm supposed to take out the trash. I said, no, Snuffy. I said, it's not your job to take out the trash, right? It's your job to take care of everybody in this unit. It's my job to take care of you, so you can help take care of everybody in this unit. And we took the trash out, and I walked, and he later became into my platoon. And a year later, we found ourselves in Iraq, and he ended up being one of our best soldiers. He had a knee injury, and he had recovered. He was driving a vehicle, and and so he had this. We're on patrol, and we're trying to, we had the people who were in the front, and I was in the back. We're calling back in terms of like suspicious enemy vehicles, because at this time, the insurgency was using vehicle-borne IEDs, or basically they're putting bombs on vehicles, and they were using them to kind of help defeat our convoys. So we're calling out suspicious vehicles, and he calls back, and I hear the radio crackle in the back. I hear Snuffy talking, and he's the truck commander in this one particular vehicle, and he's like, calling out, identifying the direction and the distance and the type of vehicle it was, and I couldn't quite break out what the make of the vehicle was, and I said, say again, make out of the vehicle, and and he says Toyota, he says Tango, Oscar, Yankee, Oscar, Tango, Alpha, Toyota, take out your trash, asshole. And we just howled, and I was like, and I came back and gave him a big bro hug, and told him thank you for taking this tense moment and then decreasing the tension, by having that moment, and so forever that would be my lesson in servant leadership, was never to be too good to take out your own trash, and to always take care of the people who take care of you, because someday they'll be able to save somebody's life, maybe, to include your own.
I love it. Take out your own trash, as good as make your bed. All right. So enough of me. We are going to open it up for questions, and I know we've got quite a few. So it's always cool when we have a new member. So we've got a question from Anne, and I apologize if I mispronounced the last name, Luce. Anne Luce, you're up with Andy Riise.
Thanks, Scott. I'm actually here on my wife's Zoom account. Her name is Ann. Andy loses, as in Andy loses. Okay, so my question for Andy, how are you here as a speaker among all the other amazing other speakers? And do you really think you can beat a Navy SEAL?
I know I can beat a Navy SEAL. Flat out. Oh, look at that picture. Oh, that's hilarious. Oh my
John
God,
McCaskill, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow.
I love all the chatter before I got on
That's
here
amazing.
about
Let's
how Andy is going to beat me.
Let's go. I
love how
awesome.
Admiral McCraven and Admiral Stockdale were referenced in your talk.
That's
I
right.
didn't hear a whole lot of Army talk, but hey, I just finished up a long swim, and Andy, I don't know if you know anything about that, so I want to be sure you're safe. So I'm going to bring you these when we meet up in San Antonio next month.
You got floaties?
All right,
You got
some
me floaties
for you. All right.
That's awesome.
And hey, I know everyone loves Andy's hippo videos. All right.
That's right.
Look, the cute little hippo right here. I know everybody loves it. Well, let me tell you, Army and Andy, the little hippo, are about to get eaten by Johnny the shark and then spit out. All right. Now, I'm going to put on my cool guy sunglasses.
You put on your gaiters?
My gaiters here that you are never, ever going to be cool enough to wear, Andy. But in all seriousness, hey, man, you rock, brother. I love you. Honored to be in this competition with you. And for those who are interested and want to know more about what all this was just about, I will put a link in the chat. But Andy and I are challenging one another in a half Ironman to raise money for Warrior Rising, and it's just so much fun. And wanted to ambush you, a quick surprise for you, Andy. Love you, man.
Love you, brother. That's hilarious. That's like the funniest thing you've ever done in your life. You need to hope we're recording this.
Oh yeah, it's being recorded. Scott and I coordinated for a week on this.
That's fantastic, man. I love the props. Hey, and I love how you deferred back to you got me with your like Louisiana accent, man. You deferred back to your roots, man.
You didn't know that was me?
I didn't know that was you.
That's awesome.
That was hilarious. You totally duped me, man. That was so funny. Well done.
All right,
Guys,
next question.
support these guys. What Warrior Rising is doing for our transitioning vets is incredible. Andy and John are good natured now. I don't think they will be on in October when this goes down. But they are on a mission to raise $133,000 for Warrior Rising. We did our part by buying some t-shirts and supporting them. I would encourage everybody to do the same. John, Andy loses. Love it.
Andy loses.
I like
That
that,
is
right?
well done. That is too clever, man. That's funny.
All right, that's a
I gotta
tough.
create it. So when McCaskill, I just want to point out that I actually beat McCaskill to this forum as a speaker. I just want to throw that out there for you. So when he comes on, whenever that is, I'm gonna make sure that we get him back.
We'll be ready for that. We'll let a little time go by so that
That's
maybe
right.
you forget. So
Exactly.
that is a tough act to follow. But we're gonna go to Arizona and we're going to you, Sonny.
All right, thanks, guys. So I'm very supportive and very much of the school of thought around the champion mindset, mental resilience, by way of navigating that really hard stuff as smart as possible.
Sure.
And so the question I want to throw out there is, we see so much of the easy quit or the cute quit, like, oh gosh, I really need more balance. I need this. So I've been in the corporate world for the last 20 years in healthcare, as you had mentioned, and you talked a little bit about the millennial piece. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how to best lead and develop those millennials who may find that, I don't want to make a generalization, but in my experience, it's been way easier for them to walk away or quit on something.
Right.
And so what are your thoughts on how to develop that?
It's a great question. And, I've really gone back and forth on this too, because obviously the soldiers that I was leading, I'm on the cusp of being a Gen X and millennial, right? And so I just made the cutoff for me to Gen X which I was happy about, because millennials got bashed for so many years, right?
Right.
Everybody loves to bash millennials. And I kind of saw I kind of realized that they were doing something when I was in the military that I did not. They'd signed up to go to war, right? And I came in a peacetime army. And so that really shifted my paradigm. I'm like, okay, well, they're not all snowflakes here, because clearly you have people who are not only signed up, but continue to sign up to go to the nation at war, right? Whether they agreed with it or not. And I was really impressed by that. And it was not my 20 years in the Army and John in the Navy, were not easy. And so it is very easy to quit. So I was very impressed by that. So I said, okay, well, obviously the Gen X, Gen Z, that's my children, right? I've got teenagers, right? So it's a really interesting case study we even have at home, and I'm sure you do it as well, Sonny. But it's interesting. I think I grew up under a leadership principle that, this is a Nietzsche saying, so I'm going to get philosophical. If you have a big enough why, you can do any what. And then the leadership principle, how that translates, is like, if you tell people why, they will run through walls for you. Our generation, Gen X and generation before, you didn't have to say why. It was all about the message to Garcia. Hey, take the initiative. You don't need to be told why or how. You just go do it, and you find a way, right? And so this generation is different. I don't think it's a bad thing to talk about the purpose and the why behind what you do, because I think what that does is that, and what I would recommend doing is be really good at giving leaders intent. And in the military, it's called commander's intent. So that's talking about your purpose, right? Hey, we're taking on a task. We're taking on a mission, right? What is the why behind, what is the overarching purpose behind what I'm doing? What are the 3 to 5 key tasks we need to accomplish in order that are critical to accomplish the mission? And then what do we get out of this? And then I get out of the way and I let them do it. And then I continue to give them guidance and support and so on and so forth, right? And I think that, this generation and the future generations are going to demand intent, right? Whereas our generation did not. So if you're not giving good intent, you're not going to get good outcomes, because ultimately, if you don't have a good enough why, and then they're going to ask themselves, what's in it for me? And that's another challenge that you have. I see that a lot in the athletic side. A lot of the coaches that I work with at the youth level, especially in that middle school, high school level, you see, multi-sport athletes or great students who just quit all of a sudden, and then because the answer is not what's in it for them. And so it's what's the we versus me mentality, right? But if you're able to have an overarching, larger purpose of the mission that taps into their values, their beliefs, and their why, that alignment is more likely to happen, right? I know that's easier said than done, believe me. But I think it's an easy thing to practice. Practice that with yourself. Give yourself intent for what you're doing. Okay, what's the purpose behind what I'm doing? What are the 3 things I need to do? And what am I trying to get out of this? And then that allows you to then be able all right, now how do I communicate that in a very concise way to this generation? So I hope that answers your question, Sonny.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Fantastic answer. Love it. We're going to Florida. Randy Ostrow, you're up.
Hey, thank you very much, Coach. I'm sitting here, I have 2 college age kids, and I know a bunch of people on this call have kids that are younger or approaching that. And I wonder why all the wisdom that you've gained through the military, professional sports, the boardrooms, why is it that more colleges these days aren't taking lessons that are so obvious about personal development to increase productivity, and they're still teaching stuff that may or may not be relevant? I'm not expecting you to have an answer, by the way. It just seems crazy to me because it's obvious that if you develop the mind of the person, the results follow. So when my daughter is going to UCF and I'm looking at the choices of classes, there's nothing that even comes close to this. So it's just an observation. I don't even know if it's a question.
No, it's a great observation and a good question. And it's something that I think is really poignant and speaks to me because I've been wrestling with it for a long time. I was lucky that I got mental skills training when I was getting my butt kicked at West Point. And I went to a unique center called the Center for Enhanced Performance, who in 1989 brought sports psychology into the military. Had that not happened, I probably wouldn't even be here, right? And so when I went to combat for the first time, I realized, all right, the enemy's not fighting fair. We have to adapt and overcome. And my mental toughness came to a premium. So, but when I came home, I developed these mental skills on my own, but I didn't know how to teach them to anybody else. And therein lies the problem. We understand, I think what's interesting is that we know how important mental health, I call it mental fitness. Mental fitness includes health, resilience, and performance, all in one, mental fitness. So we understand mental fitness, that whole psychological spectrum is really important. And that's a fantastic thing. And now things like mindfulness and meditation, things that John McCaskill talks about, they're mainstream, right? The pandemic has brought them front and center. We still have a gap in training and education. We are not empowering down to the lowest level, getting this skill set down to the people who need it this most at the youth level. And that's why I'm so passionate about shifting the mental skills consultant model to make it more accessible, because it was frustrating for me that why are only elite athletes on the tactical or sports side? Why are they we're trying to make really good athletes just a little bit better. That's important. But we got kids, down in Uvalde in Texas who just had a mass school shooting who got to go back to school now. What the hell are we doing for them? Why are we not empowering the teachers and the coaches and the parents? And why are we not? And the beautiful thing is that we have technology to do this. And so I'm so passionate about taking the content and the things that I've learned over the years, packaging it in a way that doesn't feel like homework. It doesn't feel like work. It's gamified. There's a social aspect to it. It destigmatized mental training, just like you would go to the gym. It's personal training for your brain. And it gets it into the hands of our young people. And it also empowers our athletic coaches who are kind of like parents, and they spend more time with their kids than we do at certain points, and our teachers, and, to reinforce these mental skills. And so it's teaching the people who are in direct influence of our young people, empowering them with this skill set that they can internalize it, but teach it to others. But it's also getting these tools into young people's hands. So when they encounter adversity for the first time, that may seem insignificant to us because we have the benefit of experience. Why wait until you fail to learn from something? Why not do the prehab for the brain ahead of time, to where I've increased your threshold for stress, because I've trained your brain just like you trained your body. You have a support network there, and then that just increases your chances for success. And again, easier said than done. But I think that we can use a combination of good quality instruction delivered through digital means, and we can democratize mental skills training, and not just because products scale, people don't, and frankly, to answer your question, why don't they do it in colleges? I will tell you, Randy, that in some of the colleges and in SEC schools, I just came from Texas A&M, you have some of the best performance psychologists in the world who have never met any of the athletes on the athletic department side because they're siloed, right? Because people think they've got it all figured out. And I don't, they're protective and they don't want to cross collaborate, so on and so forth. The good news is a lot of those things are getting broken down. We have a more interdisciplinary approach, a lot of, and especially in athletics and in the military. But we're a little behind on the corporate side, frankly. The corporate wellness, the corporate wellness thing is in the past. People are like, they're done with it. They want a new solution. And so I think there's some opportunities here for us to be able to help people where they're at earlier in their lifespan development, if that answers your question.
Thank you, Coach. Amazing. I appreciate you being here today. And maybe by the time Avery, Scott Garber's baby, is in college, it'll be more mainstream.
I hope so. Just, we got to keep pounding the stone, Randy, and lock it up.
Love it. Love it. We're staying in Florida. Scott Forbes, you're up with Andy Riise.
Thank you. And Andy, thank you for all your sacrifices you made during your service. I know you probably hate to hear that, but I still have to say it. And also, I saw you for a moment there when John came on, not showing his face, ready to jump through those flames and pull out whoever that was talking to you. Like it's written all over your face. But
I see you're a vet too. Thank you for your service. I see you're an aviator up there behind your shoulder.
Oh yeah, Blackhawk guy.
Awesome.
So I've always felt that something that bonded us in the military was that mutual suffering that we all went through. The ultimate of that being when we went to combat, right? But also just in our basic training and our, OCS, when you went through selection. So how do you replicate that type of mutual suffering to build that level of team in the corporate sector?
Yeah, I think anytime you can simulate a healthy level of stress, is a good thing, right? So I just work with a big tax company. If you're waiting until tax time to really crank up the pressure on the individual and collective pressure, to then raise their threshold psychologically or as a team, you're too late. You're already behind the power curve, right? And I experienced this in baseball, Scott. Like you and I know this, it's in spades. It's like, hey, you got to train like you fight. It's really hard to replicate the realism of combat at home station. Like we try to do that, in our scrimmages at our combat training centers, but there's no national training center for, Johnson & Johnson, right? So how do you do that, right? I think through simulations are really important too. And I'm not saying like necessarily technology wise, but through scenarios to where you're putting your team through the paces towards what they expect. And then you go back and you review it. And I think you could do that like through a 4-phase model, just like we know, you're planning a mission, it's plan, prepare, execute, assess, right? And so if I'm doing an individual simulation that may involve some red teaming, for example, to where they're changing the variables, you're getting you're going through it yourself as a leader with your team, but you're getting an outside look that's playing the devil's advocate, changing the variables in terms of time, intensity, sudden change, challenge, adversity, and then you're pressing pause, and then you're going back and then you're reviewing it, and you're talking about, okay, what was supposed to happen, what actually did happen, what went well, what didn't, right? So I think if you treat it, and then you slowly, and then once you back off, you allow some recovery to happen, and then you do it again, and then you ramp up the variables again. I think just through complexity and through the crunch of time, you can really simulate some stress in your environment, in your work environment that you otherwise wouldn't get. But we don't do that because it takes a little effort, takes a little planning. It's uncomfortable, and we like to think that we don't have time for that, but the reality is quite something different.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
Jervis put something in the chat that I think is you named a whole bunch of resources throughout this conversation. So one thing is all of these are archived, so they're on Mighty Network, so you can go back and re-listen. But Andy, is there a go-to resource for mental toughness in particular that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a veteranpreneur too, so until I get my site up, I'd recommend going to AQR International. I mean, they've taken a lot of there's some of the researchers and authors on the art and science of mental toughness over the last 50 years, and they're a phenomenal resource. I'm partnered with them, so I'd highly recommend them if you're interested in that too. Obviously if you're interested in reaching out to me, I'd love to be able to help you and your team design and perform. We provide, not only guest keynote speaking virtually and in person, we do workshops, and then we develop content that we are going to be delivering through a couple of our app partners here coming up. I won't name names because the ink isn't dry yet, but the good news is we're going to be delivering our content on some other, holistic fitness apps. They're not just a one-stop shop, that type of thing, to do just exactly what we were talking about is like, hey, how do you get this? How do you go high tech, low touch with the ability to be able to then go, all right, and I can do high touch and low tech, just like traditional coaching workshops, those type of things as well too. So definitely check that out as well too. You can follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn. It's kind of where my Kung Fu is the strongest right now. Next probably would be LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm on there, but it's too frantic for me. I'm not very good at it. So, but the best way to find me is on LinkedIn and
Not TikTok, Andy. Not TikTok.
Not yet, man. Not yet. I'm still getting the hippos is about as TikTok. My hippo videos are about as TikToky as I get, man.
I love it. So as a community that plans on growing to 1,000 strong by the end of the year, what can we do to help support you?
Yeah, I would say just continue to connect. I would love to follow up with y'all. I'm gonna drop my email here in the chat as well too. Kathy, if you don't mind doing that for me, get a chance my design to perform one. Please reach out to me. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I understand the power of the network. It's my superpower, something that I think is reciprocal in nature. If you know of anybody that could use someone like me that could provide services that I mentioned, please let me know. I'm open for business, and I want to grow my business, but more importantly, I want to help serve people, to help leaders and teams get better at what they do from the inside out. That's what I'm about. That's what y'all are about. And I think together we can do some really cool stuff. And I'm really honored to be a member of this awesome community, this team of teams.
Toyota, love it.
Toyota, man, let's go.
You got it. So what are the chances? We're going to wrap up here. We'll stay for a little overtime for anybody that wants to stay, but we know that Andy's got to probably run. What are the chances that McCaskill beats you in October?
Oh, you want me to do like Vegas odds? Like you want to be like over under?
Yeah.
It's gonna be close. I'm gonna be honest with you too. But to be honest with you, I think a win is if we just, I'll be politically correct. I think the win is just let's raise a lot of money for veteran-owned businesses. Like we want to finish and stay healthy and have fun, and just really enjoy. I'm just loving this experience, and I'm so thankful for Warrior Rising and Jason and John and everyone who supported us, including the people on this call. Thank you, Scott, for your donations. I just think we have an opportunity to do a lot of good and inspire people to go grow by doing hard things and continue serving.
Absolutely love it. This has been a phenomenal hour. Cannot thank you enough. Kathy, take us out.
This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made. This is how legends are made.
Thanks again, Andy. We appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining. Anybody that wants to stay on for a couple of minutes and talk to Garber's daughter, you certainly can.